Good evening. My name is Robert Corre. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's broadcast or podcast on the study of astrology as natural science and as art. Today's presentation, podcast 1, will consider astrology or natural science of astrology based on observation, a fundamental skill, and from the point of view of art, the idea of order and structure. So this is for the purpose of introducing a new cycle of classes based on the tradition of the 17th century astrologer Morin de Villefranche, as was taught by the late Zoltan Mason of New York City. Later on, you can contact me, but for information on a start date, tuition, length of course, of study, primary text, course materials, and so on, you're welcome to email me or call me between 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. any day. So today's presentation is the first of 3 podcasts describing the curriculum in a new cycle of course classes beginning September 2024. Next Sunday, podcast 2 on May 5th, we'll go over the idea of methodology and synthesis. Podcast 3 on May 12th on forecasting. So let's get into the topic. As a natural science, astrology is based on observation. This is a fundamental skill. And from the point of view of art, the importance of structure and order. This tradition comes down from Morin de Villefranche, a Frenchman from the 17th century, and taught to me by the late Zoltan Mason of New York City. Mason pointed out that the practice of astrology encourages leading a moral and ethical life and provides a means to offer others social and emotional help from a practical viewpoint. So, how do we define astrology? The study of motivation and drive. What attracts you and how strongly are you attracted? What pushes you and how strongly are you pushed? Motivations and drives are based on the 4 basic human pursuits. They can be subdivided further into 2 sets. One set, the pursuit of security and pleasure, is shared in common to all living things, not just human beings. The other set, effort in accordance to ethics and the pursuit of freedom, is peculiar to human beings. Whatever is possible for the native must be already present at birth or in potential. And this will go into in some depth when we do the podcast number 2 next Sunday, May 5th. As I had mentioned before, Mason taught that the role of the teacher is to give trustworthy testimony, and the student's role, don't be a blind believer. If something doesn't make sense, spit it out. That's the student's responsibility to himself or herself. A fundamental axiom in life is, while the teacher gives trustworthy testimony, the teacher does not teach. The great teacher is life experience. The astrologer is scientist and ultimately also an artist or poet. And just as the sun and moon are 2 halves of the same thing, observation and imagination are its 2 halves. Just as someone goes to a professional school to become a physician or takes an apprenticeship to become a craftsman, so too must a person be schooled to think as an astrologer. Therefore, the need for training. The program's goal is to teach a person how to think as an astrologer. Why is the word natural emphasized in the title, the study of astrology as natural science and as art, rather than just astrology as science? We must be clear about what natural means. The word natural refers to the physical, to the things that can be observed and measured by the 5 senses: that is observation. We call this rational. There are other branches of astrology that may be called supernatural or metaphysical, meaning that they go beyond the realm of the senses and are considered irrational. These studies are termed irrational as they refer to concepts that cannot be observed through the physical world, the world of the five senses. So, there are two astrologies. The first is rational, and that is from the point of view of our earthly life through the senses. So, the quote, "Nothing is in our intellect which was not in our senses first." The other astrology is called irrational. It goes beyond the life of our senses. For example, if there is no earth or earth element in the horoscope, the person behaves irrationally on a physical level. For example, not very practical, no foresight with regard to the future, and so on. Rational astrology is based on the earthy physical level, but it's not rational on other levels. To explain other levels, deeper levels in a person on the physical level would be called irrational. For example, to explain water, the emotions on the physical level would be called irrational from a physically oriented person. This lack of appreciation to differentiate astrology as a natural science based on observation versus those branches that go beyond the physical is the fundamental root of academic science misunderstanding of this perennial art, with the conclusion that astrology is a pseudoscience as it makes scientific claims about the world that supported by evidence. Physical refers to things that can be observed and measured by the five senses, while the metaphysical refers to concepts or ideas that cannot be observed or measured through the senses, the physical world. So please appreciate that the new program to start in late spring is the study of astrology as a natural science, as a study of our day-to-day world based on observation, on our five senses. The new course of study is rational. It's based on the senses, our experience in the world. Whatever is said about a person based on their horoscope must be substantiated by considerations in the natal chart. Of the three structural elements in a horoscope, signs, planets, and the houses, it is the houses that we relate the various daily experiences. Astrologically, we symbolize the outside world, the environment, when we open our eyes and the other senses to one or more of the 12 pie-shaped wedges, slices called houses. The phrase, "all the world's a stage," is a metaphor from Shakespeare's play As You Like It that compares the world to a stage and life to a play. Astrologically, the world as a stage is symbolized as the 12 houses. But basically, there are only 4 houses. The image, or the image of our relationship to others, is the world, is with the houses 1, 4, 10, and 7. So how can we express that? We can say you and another come together in the social contract called marriage to build up a shared future and home. The other 8 houses permit the goals of each of the angular houses to accommodate goals of the other angular houses. From this point of view, we are able to relate all our experiences with the environment, the outside world, to one or more of the 12 houses. What means a physical or a natural science? It is what you observe the physical world by means of all the 5 senses. So everything what is astrology is based on observation. Now, how old is astrology? Thousands, 100,000, a million years? It can never be answered. There are natural laws in nature, and astrology is based on observation. Therefore, the evolution of astrology is based on observation. An interesting note, of the 5 senses, 4 are located about the head: sight, eyes, sound, hearing, smell, nose, taste, tongue, touch, and touch. But touch is unique. This is important point. Touch is unique. The skin covers the entire body. Our common immediate experience is that the skin separates what we call the outside world from what we consider our inside world. How unique is this experience? The skin separates the inside from the outside. We can feel heat, pressure, moisture outside and also inside our bodies. How moisture? You can become dehydrated. How pressure? You can feel a full bladder. Lungs can be pressed by the diaphragm. How heat? Recall that regulation of heat, hot and cold, is by the hypothalamus or the body's thermostat. The fundamental point, which may seem to be made over repetitive, is that astrology as a natural science is based on observation. So, comments on the grammar and methodology, which we'll talk about on May 5th, but we'll give a little bit of an overview here. Mason would say, if you don't know what to expect from a planet, you cannot hope to become an astrologer. So how to get the feeling? Be able to write out your chart along with a number of charts of those people with whom you are intimate. Here we have the chart of Beyonce. This requirement, this exercise, to know the charts of yourself and others. This is your touchstone, identifying feeling with the symbol. This is, hand down, far and away, the single most important practical task to accomplish. Why? How to start building your feelings for a planet based on the people you know. Look to the ascendant. A planet can be connected to the ascendant in many ways, and if it is, you will see the attributes of that planet when interacting with the person. And we'll talk more about that next week in podcast 2. For that, we must have a grasp of the basic grammar, the signs, the planet, the houses. You have to appreciate that each one of us is born differentiated. Each birth chart is constituted in such a way as to give you and others a limited field of experience. And as you proceed in life, daily living adds to your palette of experiences. For example, if I mention a given sign, let's take it, I've asked someone, is there any sign that you don't have a sense? Oh, someone may say Taurus. And the person will consider their chart. There's nothing that's really could be prominent with regard to the sign of Taurus in their chart. And the person looks around of other charts of people they know, and also the sign Taurus is not there. So this is what we mean, that each chart is constituted in such a way as to give a limited field of experience. And as you go on in life, you gather additional experience that will help build your palette of experiences. Now, one of the things that I've heard a number of people say, which is really, it's unfortunate, it's funny in a way, but it's unfortunate. It said, if someone tells I can understand the horoscopes of others, but not my own, that's a joke. You can only understand others to the extent you have a feeling for yourself. We have something called the archetype, the 12 signs of the zodiac taken as a unit. And this is by far the single most important theoretical tool for the practitioner. And we'll be talking more about that next week. What about, as a science, it's based on observation, but what about its natural complement, art? The art of imagination. What do we mean by art? Art is an imitation of nature, said by the quote from Seneca the Elder, a Roman senator. The ancients to the Renaissance taught art is form, the basic principle in the creation of art. It's a way to practice. Art is a method, how you put something together. And what does the natural world give to the astrologer as an artist? The archetype. The archetype is the first physical manifestation in the physical world, the world of space and time. Now, art is form. The basic principle in the creation of art. Art is imagination. The zodiac is the principal form in nature. The natural zodiac, what Zoltan Mason called the archetype, 12 signs taken as a unit, is our model. Again, more about the archetype next week. Well, appreciate that Moran understood the zodiac. All traditions, East and West, acknowledge the supremacy of the East Point, the ascendant. Zoltan Mason's methodology acknowledged the priority of chart consideration, starting always with the ascendant. He would always say, many times in class, when he had a client, he always had 3 charts before his eyes. The client's, his own, and the archetype. He taught that the archetype could answer all the questions about life. So Mason, or Moran, as taught by Mason, trained us to use an organized, structured approach to interpretation. That is, train yourself to prioritize your observations. There is a method to this. It's a way to practice. So as an art, it's a method. What you mention first is more important than what you mention second, and so on. And by changing the order of your observations, you will completely change your image of the person, your understanding of the chart. And I have been to any number of conferences or lectures where either before, during, or after a lecture, someone will show me a chart. And in many times, or many cases, a person will start talking randomly about a chart, not even taking into account any kind of organized approach. They'll just randomly look at some things. Or they may have their own way to go through the chart. And the good news is at least it's consistent and they're using some kind of structure. But is it going to give an image that will be satisfactory? So by changing the order of your observations, you completely change your image. For example, by changing the order of your observations, you will change completely not only your initial, but also your final imagination or impression or image of the person, your understanding of the chart. So let's say here Beyonce Knowles has Leo rising, but instead you talk about, I say Virgo. Right away I have an image of Virgo. Then maybe you say, oh, the moon is in Scorpio, or the stellium in Libra instead of Leo ascendant. You're going to put a different image. When you use words, words spin your imagination and you invoke something. One of the things that is fundamental when you study a chart is always to study not only quality but quantity. If I would mention, for example, the sun in Virgo, or the planets, let's take it in Scorpio, instead of Leo rising, already that is a quantitative reduction in strength relative to the sign on the ascendant. The sign on the ascendant has a 100% impact on the person. The ascendant is the animal. It's the mental, moral, and physical constitution of the person. So the ordering is the art. How you put the stones together, as Mason would say. Again, in podcast 2, we'll start to analyze a chart, the methodology. Here we have Beyonce. Moran's tradition forms the basis that encourages chart synthesis, in which one sees the chart as an imagined whole. Moran's approach necessitates the study of the chart structural elements in a prioritized and organized fashion. Again, Mason would say, how do you put the stones together? That's the art. In this approach, what you mentioned first is more important than what you mentioned second. So briefly, one of the big problems is that many people don't know how to enter the chart. The first consideration will always be the ascendant. This is the foundation. From there, you go to study the midheaven, then the moon, then the sun, then anything unusual. This fifth step, what's unusual, is significant because you are either going to be adding or mitigating or somehow qualifying what you observed in the first 4 steps. Leo rising is tremendous. Against it, 5 planets in Libra. Nothing but nothing is more important than the ascendant, but there are some things that could compete for importance with the ascendant. In this instance, the 5 planets in Libra. More next week on this. So the art is to pull all the observed images together in 5 steps into a meaningful whole, an image of the person as a living thing. The guideline is to start always with the ascendant, remembering, again, what you mentioned first is more important than what you mentioned second. And what is the discipline required in practice? You train yourself to simplify, simplify, simplify. The difficulty with studying a horoscope is not that there's too little information. Quite the contrary, there's too much information. The truth is, the less experience you have, the greater the danger of being confused, overwhelmed, and stopping to study on a regular basis. It's important to develop a habit where you study a little bit each day rather than, say, a couple of hours on the weekend. Even if you do 15 or 20 minutes every day, that is much more effective in the longer run than trying to say, oh, I'm going to get to this, I'll study a couple of hours each weekend. Repetition of a habit strengthens a habit. The idea is your thinking should become automatic. You say, yes, ascendant, midheaven, moon, sun, anything unusual. But it should become so ingrained, so habituated in you, that you don't even think about it as you start to go through the chart. That is a fundamental skill. Just as we said, being able to associate a symbol with a feeling, here, the idea that you have a repetitive way to go through the chart as second nature. You don't even think about it. Now, people have asked, is astrology difficult to learn? The response in 3 words when some hear it, people laugh, smile, and still others are puzzled. Look, remember, guess. This is so very important. To be a good listener, to be a good observer, you have to be present and not easily pulled away. So you have to train yourself to be a careful observer. I mentioned last time, Sherlock Holmes said to his friend and companion, Dr. Watson, "You see, but you do not observe. Be present and mindful. This means attention." So how can observation change the outcome? Bias occurs when you alter what we see, either by only noticing what we expect or by behaving in ways that have influence on what occurs. And we'll talk more about this point later. So we've come to this introduction of this presentation. Tomorrow I will list podcasts 2 and 3 on Facebook under events or your shortcuts, inviting you to attend over the next 2 weeks. And again, for information on start date, tuition, length of course of study, primary text, course materials, recordings, please email or call any day between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Thank you for your attention, and